The security guard's polite but firm voice still echoed in my ears as I stood in the lobby of Meridian Technologies, clutching a cardboard box containing 20 years of my professional life, when my phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification that made my blood run cold. My former boss, Marcus Wellington, was celebrating a promotion to CEO with champagne toasts in his corner office, the same office where he'd fired me just 3 hours earlier. The caption read, "New leadership, new vision, exciting times ahead," but Marcus had no idea that buried in my desk drawer, which security hadn't allowed me to fully clear out, was a signed contract that would destroy everything he'd just celebrated. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The contract that proved I was the sole point of contact for Apex Industries, our company's largest client, worth $42 million annually. The client that represented 60% of Meridian's total revenue. The client that had specifically requested in writing that all communications flow exclusively through me, Dr. Victoria Chen, and no one else. The November rain drummed against the glass doors of Meridian Technologies as I waited for my Uber, watching employees I'd trained and mentored stream past me without making eye contact. Some looked genuinely shocked to see me leaving with a termination box. Others avoided my gaze entirely, probably already aware of the boardroom coup that had just taken place. 20 years of dedication, innovation, and client relationships, reduced to a cardboard container and a security escort out of the building. I had started at Meridian fresh out of MIT with my PhD in biomedical engineering, young and eager to change the world through technological innovation. The company was smaller then, just 40 employees crammed into a converted warehouse, but we had vision and determination. I'd worked my way up from junior researcher to senior vice president of client relations, building the department from scratch and cultivating relationships with some of the most prestigious companies in the biotech industry. Marcus Wellington had joined Meridian 8 years ago as chief operating officer, a smooth-talking MBA from Harvard who specialized in what he called operational efficiency and strategic restructuring. From day one, I'd sensed something calculating about his approach to business relationships, where I built long-term partnerships based on trust and technical expertise. Marcus focused on short-term profit maximization and cost-cutting measures that often damaged client confidence. The firing had come without warning during what I'd been told was a routine quarterly review meeting. I'd entered the conference room expecting to discuss Q4 projections and our upcoming contract renewals, particularly the massive Apex Industries deal that I'd been negotiating for 6 months. Instead, I found Marcus seated at the head of the table with our chief financial officer, Janet Morrison, and 2 people I didn't recognize who turned out to be from human resources. "Victoria," Marcus had said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "thank you for joining us. Please, have a seat." The formality in his voice should have been my first warning. In 8 years of working together, Marcus had never used that tone with me, especially not during routine business meetings. Janet Morrison, whom I'd considered a friend and ally for over a decade, wouldn't meet my eyes as she slid a folder across the table. "Victoria, we need to discuss some concerns that have come to light regarding your performance and adherence to company protocol." My stomach had dropped immediately. Performance concerns? I had the highest client retention rate in the company's history. My department had exceeded revenue targets for 7 consecutive years. Just last month, I'd successfully negotiated the largest contract in Meridian's history with Apex Industries, a 3-year deal worth $126 million total. "I'm sorry, what concern?" I'd asked, genuinely confused as I opened the folder to find a collection of emails and reports I'd never seen before. The documents appeared to show irregularities in my expense reports, questionable client entertainment expenses, and what looked like unauthorized commitments made to clients without proper board approval. Marcus leaned forward with practiced concern. "Victoria, we've discovered some troubling patterns in your client management approach: unauthorized promises, excessive entertainment expenses, and what appears to be a concerning level of personal involvement with client representatives that may have compromised your professional judgment." The accusation was so absurd that I'd actually laughed. "Marcus, every expense I've submitted has been pre-approved by Janet's department, Every client commitment I've made has been documented and cleared through proper channels. And as for personal involvement with clients, I challenge you to find a single instance where I've behaved unprofessionally. That's when one of the HR representatives, a stern woman in her 50s, had spoken up. Chen, we have documentation suggesting that you've been making commitments to clients that exceed your authority level, particularly regarding the Apex Industries contract. The board is concerned that you may have overstepped your boundaries in ways that could expose the company to legal liability. I'd stared at her in disbelief. The Apex contract had been my project from inception, developed over months of careful negotiation and technical consultation. Every term had been reviewed by our legal department. Every commitment had been approved by the executive committee. Marcus himself had signed off on my negotiation parameters just 3 months earlier. That's impossible, I'd said, pulling out my phone to access the shared drive where all contract documentation was stored. Everything is documented in our system. You can see the approval chain for every aspect of the Apex deal. Marcus had exchanged a meaningful look with Janet before responding. Victoria, I think you'll find that some of those documents may not reflect the current company position. We've had to make some adjustments to our client commitments, based on operational realities. The pieces had started falling into place with sickening clarity. The shared drive access I'd noticed being spotty over the past week. The meetings Marcus had been having with our legal team that I'd been excluded from. The questions Janet had been asking about my client files under the guise of routine auditing. They'd been planning this for weeks, systematically undermining my work and creating a paper trail that would justify my termination. But what they didn't understand was that my relationship with Apex Industries went far beyond standard client service protocol. I want to speak with David Kim immediately, I'd said, referring to our CEO and the man who'd hired me 20 years earlier. David had been my mentor, my advocate, and the person who'd encouraged me to build the client relations department, according to my own vision. The second HR representative, a younger man who'd been taking notes throughout the meeting, had cleared his throat uncomfortably. Dr. Chen, Mr. Kim is no longer with the company. His resignation was announced internally this morning. The room had gone silent, except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. David Kim, the founder and visionary behind Meridian Technologies, had resigned on the same day they were firing me. This wasn't just a personnel decision. It was a complete corporate takeover. Marcus had leaned back in his chair, with barely concealed satisfaction. The board has elected me as interim CEO effective immediately. One of my first priorities is ensuring that our client relationships are managed according to proper corporate governance standards. Unfortunately, your approach to client management has been deemed inconsistent with our new operational framework. I'd looked around the table at people I'd worked with for years, people I'd trained and supported and considered friends, all of them avoiding eye contact as they participated in what was clearly a premeditated ambush. This is about the Apex contract, I'd said quietly. You think you can cut me out and take credit for the deal I negotiated? Janet had finally looked up, her expression a mixture of guilt and defensiveness. Victoria, this isn't personal. It's about what's best for the company's future. The board feels that client relationships should be managed by multiple team members rather than being concentrated in one person's portfolio. The corporate speak had been infuriating, but I'd forced myself to remain calm. Janet, you know as well as I do that Apex specifically requested single point of contact management. That was one of their non-negotiable terms. Dr. Harrison made it very clear that they wanted to work exclusively with me. Marcus had waved dismissive. Client preferences are certainly important, but they need to be balanced against operational efficiency. We're confident that our team can maintain the Apex relationship without compromising the company's flexibility. That's when I'd realized they had no idea what they were doing. They'd been so focused on removing me from the equation that they'd failed to understand the actual terms of the contract I'd negotiated, the binding clauses that protected Apex's interests and specified exactly how the relationship would be managed. The termination meeting had concluded with the standard paperwork, a severance package that was generous enough to prevent immediate legal action, but modest enough to send a message about my supposed performance issue. I'd signed the documents in a daze, knowing that fighting the termination immediately would be futile without proper preparation. Security had escorted me to my office where I'd been given 15 minutes to pack personal items under supervision. The irony wasn't lost on me that they'd treated me like a potential corporate spy when, in reality, I was probably the most loyal employee in the building. But their paranoia had worked in their favor in one crucial way. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The rushed packing meant I'd only been able to grab obvious personal items while leaving behind files and documents that could have proven my innocence. What they didn't know was that I'd been anticipating some kind of power play from Marcus for months. The signs had been subtle but consistent. Meetings I'd been excluded from, questions about my client management methods, suggestions that my department needed fresh perspectives and new blood. I'd prepared for the possibility of corporate warfare, but I'd underestimated the speed and ruthlessness of Marcus's approach. As I stood in the lobby waiting for my ride, I'd pulled out my phone to check the Apex Industries folder I'd stored in my personal cloud account. The contract was there, all 47 pages of carefully negotiated terms and conditions, including the clause that would bring Marcus's celebration to a very abrupt end. Section of the Apex Industries Service Agreement, negotiated personally by me and approved by their Chief Technology Officer, Dr. Jennifer Harrison, specified that all project communications, technical consultations, and contract modifications must be conducted exclusively through Dr. Victoria Chen or a designated successor approved in writing by Apex's executive committee. The clause further specified that any changes to the account management structure would constitute a material breach of contract, giving Apex the right to terminate the agreement immediately and seek damages for any disruption to their operation. Marcus had fired the one person he couldn't afford to lose, and he didn't even know it yet. My Uber arrived as the rain intensified, and I'd climbed into the back seat with my cardboard box, my mind already racing through the implications of what had just happened. The driver, a kind older man named Robert, had noticed my obvious distress and asked if I was okay. I'd managed a weak smile and told him I'd just had a difficult day at work, which was certainly an understatement. As we drove through the city toward my apartment, I'd started making mental lists of everything I needed to do. First, I needed to contact my lawyer to review the termination paperwork and explore options for wrongful dismissal claims. Second, I needed to reach out to my contacts at other companies who'd been trying to recruit me for years. Third, and most importantly, I needed to prepare for the conversation I was going to have with Dr. Jennifer Harrison at Apex Industries. Jennifer and I had developed a strong professional relationship over the 6 months of contract negotiations, built on mutual respect for each other's technical expertise and a shared vision for the innovative projects we were planning. She'd specifically requested that I be the sole point of contact for Apex's partnership with Meridian, because she trusted my understanding of their complex requirements and my ability to navigate the technical challenges we'd be facing together. When Jennifer learned that Meridian had terminated me without consulting Apex, she was going to be furious. When she discovered that Marcus thought he could simply assign someone else to manage their account without Apex's approval, she was going to exercise every option available under our contract to protect her company's interest. But before I made any calls or took any action, I needed to understand exactly what Marcus was planning and how quickly he intended to move. The LinkedIn post celebrating his promotion suggested he was confident about his position, but the speed of David Kim's resignation implied there were board-level politics at play that I didn't fully understand. My apartment was a sanctuary of calm after the chaos of the day, filled with books, plants, and the photographs from 20 years of industry conferences and client meetings. I'd built a life around my career at Meridian, and in one afternoon, Marcus Wellington had shattered everything I'd worked to create. But as I opened my laptop and began reviewing the contracts and correspondence I'd saved in my personal files, I realized that Marcus had made a critical error in his calculation. He'd assumed that client relationships were just business transactions that could be transferred from one account manager to another, without consequence. He'd failed to understand that in the biotech industry, partnerships are built on personal trust, technical credibility, and long-term collaboration. You can't simply reassign a $42 million contract and expect the client to accept the change without question. More importantly, Marcus had no idea what he'd actually agreed to when the board approved my contract negotiations with Apex. He'd been so focused on the revenue projections that he'd never bothered to read the fine print, the clauses I'd insisted on to protect both companies' interests and ensure the success of our joint venture. That evening, I'd ordered Thai food and spread all my files across my dining room table, creating a timeline of everything that had led to this moment. The patterns became clear as I traced the sequence of events: Marcus's increasing interference in my client relationships, his questions about contract terms he claimed not to understand, his suggestions that we needed to modernize our client management approach. He'd been planning this takeover for months, waiting for the right moment to strike. David Kim's resignation had been either coerced or negotiated as part of a larger board coup, clearing the way for Marcus to reshape the company according to his vision. My termination was just the first step in what was probably a comprehensive restructuring designed to maximize short-term profits at the expense of long-term relationships. But Marcus had underestimated the contracts I'd negotiated and the relationships I'd built. He'd assumed that business partnerships were just pieces of paper that could be reassigned at will, without understanding that some agreements are built on personal trust and technical expertise that can't be easily transferred. As I reviewed the Apex contract one more time, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Marcus had spent months plotting to steal credit for my work, but in his eagerness to claim victory, he'd created the perfect conditions for his own downfall. The contract I'd negotiated wasn't just a revenue agreement. It was a carefully constructed legal framework that protected both companies' interests, while ensuring that the partnership would be managed by people who understood the technical complexities involved. Section 3 was just the beginning. Section 8.7 specified that any disruption to the account management structure that affected project timelines or deliverables would result in penalty payments from Meridian to Apex. Section 2 gave Apex the right to audit Meridian's technical capabilities and staffing decisions if they had concerns about project execution. Section 1 included a termination clause that would require Meridian to pay liquidated damages equal to 18 months of contract value if Apex chose to end the partnership due to Meridian's failure to maintain agreed-upon service standards. Marcus thought he'd won by removing me from the equation, but he'd actually handed Apex Industries a loaded weapon that could destroy Meridian financially. And the best part was that everything was completely legal and binding, negotiated in good faith and approved by Meridian's own board of directors. The phone call I was planning to make to Jennifer Harrison wasn't going to be a complaint or a plea for intervention. It was going to be a professional courtesy, informing a valued business partner about a significant change in circumstances that could affect our ongoing project. What Jennifer chose to do with that information would be entirely up to her, guided by her responsibility to protect Apex's interests and ensure the success of their multi-million-dollar investment in the partnership. As I prepared for bed that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the termination meeting: a sense of control. Marcus Wellington thought he'd cornered me, eliminated a threat to his corporate ambitions, and secured his position as the new leader of Meridian Technologies. He had no idea that he'd actually walked into a trap of his own making, one that I'd constructed months earlier to protect both companies from exactly the kind of short-sighted decision-making he'd just demonstrated. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day. Marcus was probably planning to announce his new client management structure and begin the process of reassigning my accounts to other team members. He was likely confident that clients would accept the changes without significant pushback, especially given the financial incentives Meridian could offer to maintain their business relationships. But Marcus had never worked directly with Apex Industries. He'd never sat through the technical planning sessions where Jennifer Harrison grilled every detail of our proposed solution. He'd never experienced the meticulous attention to detail that Apex required from their partners, or the way they evaluated every aspect of a business relationship before making commitment. When Jennifer learned that Meridian had terminated their primary point of contact without consultation or approval, she was going to view it as exactly what it was: a material breach of their carefully negotiated agreement. And when she reviewed the contract terms that protected Apex's interests in such situations, she was going to have some very interesting options to consider. I fell asleep that night with a sense of anticipation that surprised me. For the first time since entering that conference room, I felt like I had some control over my future. Marcus Wellington had made the mistake of underestimating both the contracts I'd negotiated and the relationships I'd built. He was about to learn that some victories come with a price tag that makes them indistinguishable from defeat. The morning sun streaming through my apartment windows felt like a new beginning as I prepared for what would either be the start of my comeback or the beginning of an even more difficult journey. But either way, I was no longer the helpless victim of a corporate coup. I was Victoria Chen, and I was about to remind everyone at Meridian Technologies exactly why some relationships are irreplaceable. The call to Jennifer Harrison came at exactly 9 o'clock Monday morning, precisely when I knew she'd be reviewing her weekly project schedules with her technical team at Apex Industries. I'd timed the conversation carefully, wanting to catch her during her most analytical mindset when she'd be thinking about operational efficiency and risk management, rather than personal relationships. Victoria, Jennifer's voice carried genuine warmth mixed with professional focus. Perfect timing. I was just reviewing the Phase 2 implementation timeline we discussed last week. The board is excited about moving forward with the accelerated development schedule. My stomach tightened at her enthusiasm. Marcus had no idea what he'd destroyed with his corporate coup, and Jennifer was about to discover that her carefully planned project timeline was now in serious jeopardy. Jennifer, I'm calling because there's been a significant development at Meridian that directly affects our partnership. I need to inform you about some changes in our account management structure. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds before Jennifer responded, her voice noticeably cooler. Change. Victoria, we specifically structured our agreement around single point of contact management, because of the complexity of our technical requirements. What kind of changes are we talking about? I took a deep breath, knowing that the next few sentences would determine not just my future but Marcus Wellington's as well. Jennifer, as of Friday afternoon, I'm no longer employed by Meridian Technologies. The company terminated my position and will be reassigning the Apex account to other team members. The explosion of outrage was immediate and exactly what I'd expected from someone who understood the implications of such a decision. They did what? Victoria, this is completely unacceptable. We have a signed agreement that specifically requires all account management to flow through you personally. This isn't just a personnel change. This is a breach of our fundamental partnership term. Jennifer's voice carried the sharp edge of someone who'd built her career on meticulous planning and rigorous attention to contractual detail. As Chief Technology Officer for one of the largest biotech companies in the industry, she'd negotiated hundreds of partnerships and knew exactly how to protect her company's interests when vendors failed to meet their obligations. I understand your concerns, I said carefully. And I want you to know that this decision was made without any consultation with your team or consideration of our existing agreements. I'm calling as a professional courtesy to inform you of the situation so you can make appropriate decisions about how to proceed. Jennifer's response came immediately, her tone shifting into the authoritative voice I'd heard her use when addressing board members and senior executives. Victoria, I need you to send me a complete copy of our service agreement immediately, along with any documentation related to your termination. This is potentially a material breach that could affect our entire partnership with Meridian. I could hear papers rustling on her end as she began pulling files, probably accessing the digital copies of our contract that her legal team maintained. Jennifer, I should also mention that Meridian seems to believe they can simply reassign the account without requiring written approval from your executive committee, as specified in Section 3 of our agreement. The sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. Jennifer had negotiated that clause personally, insisting on it after a previous vendor had changed account managers mid-project without consultation, causing significant delays and technical complications. They think they can just ignore our contractual requirement. Do they have any idea what this partnership means to our product development timeline? The Apex Industries partnership wasn't just another client relationship for either company. For Apex, it represented their entry into a new market segment that could generate billions in revenue over the next decade. For Meridian, it was the contract that had transformed them from a mid-sized consulting firm into a major player in the biotech industry. The technical specifications alone had required 6 months of collaborative development, with both companies investing substantial resources in the preliminary research phase. Jennifer, I think there may be some misunderstanding at the executive level about the scope and complexity of our partnership agreements. The new leadership seems to believe that client relationships can be transferred without considering the technical and legal implications. Jennifer's voice dropped to the dangerously calm tone I'd learned to recognize as her most formidable mode. Victoria, I want you to know that Apex takes our partnership agreements very serious. When we sign a contract that specifies certain service parameters and account management structures, we expect our vendors to honor those commitments completely. I could hear typing in the background as Jennifer began composing what was probably going to be a very formal and very damaging communication to Meridian's new leadership. Jennifer, I want to make sure you have all the information you need to make decisions that protect Apex's interests. Marcus Wellington has been promoted to CEO and seems confident that the transition can be handled smoothly without any disruption to ongoing projects. The laugh that came through the phone was anything but amused. Marcus Wellington, the operations manager who kept asking basic questions about our technical requirements during the planning meetings. He thinks he can manage a partnership that requires deep understanding of biomedical engineering protocols and regulatory compliance framework. Jennifer's assessment of Marcus was devastatingly accurate. Throughout the contract negotiations, Marcus had demonstrated a concerning lack of understanding about the technical complexities involved in biotech partnership. His questions had been superficial, focused more on profit margins and delivery timelines than on the scientific rigor required for successful collaboration. I'd been concerned about his involvement from the beginning, but David Kim had assured me that Marcus would be focused on operational support rather than technical management. Jennifer, I think you should also know that David Kim is no longer with the company. His resignation was announced on the same day as my termination, which suggests this was part of a coordinated leadership transition. The silence that followed was lengthy and ominous. David Kim had been Jennifer's primary contact during the initial partnership discussions, and his reputation for technical excellence and ethical business practices had been a major factor in Apex's decision to work with Meridian. His sudden departure would raise serious questions about the company's stability and commitment to their existing partnerships. When Jennifer finally spoke, her voice carried the cold precision of someone making strategic calculations. Victoria, I need to convene an emergency meeting with our legal team and executive committee. This situation has implications far beyond account management change. We're talking about potential breach of contract, misrepresentation of capabilities, and fundamental changes to the partnership structure we negotiated in good faith. I could hear the sound of calendar pages turning as Jennifer began rearranging her schedule to address what she clearly viewed as a crisis situation. Jennifer, I want you to know that I'm committed to ensuring a smooth transition for Apex, regardless of my employment status. The technical documentation and project specifications I developed are comprehensive enough that any qualified team should be able to continue the work effectively. Jennifer's response was immediate and unequivocal. Victoria, let me be very clear about something. Apex Industries negotiated this partnership specifically because of your technical expertise and project management capabilities. We're not interested in working with any qualified team. We're interested in working with the people who understand our requirements and can deliver on the commitments that were made during our contract negotiations. The implications of her statement were becoming clear, and I felt a surge of vindication mixed with professional satisfaction. Apex wasn't just going to accept the account reassignment and move forward with new team members. They were going to treat this as the material breach it actually was, with all the legal and financial consequences that Marcus had apparently never considered. Jennifer, I appreciate your confidence in my work, and I want you to know that I'll do everything possible to minimize any disruption to your project timelines. Do you want me to prepare a comprehensive transition document that could help whoever takes over the account? Jennifer's laugh was sharp and decisive. Victoria, I don't think you understand what's about to happen. Apex Industries isn't going to accept a transition to new account manager. We're going to exercise our contractual rights to protect our interests, and that may include terminating our partnership with Meridian entirely if they can't provide the service levels we negotiated. The weight of her words settled over me like a revelation. Jennifer wasn't just upset about the personnel change. She was preparing to use every legal weapon available to protect Apex's position. The contract I'd negotiated had been designed to prevent exactly this kind of situation, and the penalties for breach were severe enough to cause serious financial damage to any company that triggered. Jennifer, before you make any final decisions, you should know that I'll be exploring my own legal options regarding the termination. There may be opportunities for resolution that don't require ending the partnership entirely. Jennifer's response carried a note of genuine concern mixed with professional calculation. Victoria, I hope you understand that any decisions Apex makes will be based solely on protecting our company's interests and ensuring the success of our product development initiative. If there are ways to maintain the partnership while addressing our contractual concerns, we're certainly open to exploring those options. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, as Jennifer asked detailed questions about the circumstances of my termination, the timeline for account reassignment, and the technical capabilities of the team that would potentially be taking over our partnership. Her questions were thorough and methodical, designed to build a comprehensive understanding of the situation that her legal team could use to evaluate Apex's options. When we finally concluded the call, Jennifer's parting words carried a promise that made my pulse quicken with anticipation. Victoria, you should expect to receive a formal communication from our legal department within the next 48 hours. Apex takes our contractual obligations very seriously, and we expect the same level of commitment from our partner. I hung up the phone and immediately began preparing for what I knew was coming next. Jennifer Harrison was about to unleash the full legal and financial power of Apex Industries on Marcus Wellington and his new leadership team, and they had no idea what was about to hit them. The rest of Monday passed in a blur of research and preparation as I gathered every document, email, and file that could support my position in what was clearly going to become a complex legal and business dispute. My personal cloud storage contained comprehensive records of every interaction with Apex, every technical specification we'd developed, and every commitment Meridian had made during the contract negotiation. Tuesday morning brought the first sign that Jennifer had wasted no time in escalating the situation. My former assistant Rebecca Martinez called me at 7:30 in the morning, her voice tight with anxiety and confusion. Victoria, I'm so sorry to bother you, but something really strange is happening here. Marcus called an emergency meeting yesterday afternoon to discuss the Apex account transition, and this morning there's a team of lawyers in the conference room, with a stack of documents that looks about 3 feet high. Rebecca had been my assistant for 5 years, and she understood the Apex partnership better than anyone else at Meridian, except for me. She'd been present at most of the technical planning meetings, and had helped coordinate the complex logistics of our joint development project. Rebecca, what kind of documents are they reviewing? I asked, though I had a strong suspicion about what Apex's legal team had delivered. I don't know exactly, but I heard Marcus on the phone with Janet Morrison talking about breach of contract notifications, and something about penalty clauses. Victoria, he sounded really stressed, not like the confident executive he was trying to project yesterday. I felt a surge of satisfaction at the image of Marcus discovering that his corporate coup had triggered consequences he'd never anticipated. Rebecca, you should probably start updating your resume and exploring other opportunities. If Apex exercises their contractual rights, there could be significant changes at Meridian over the next few months. Rebecca's voice dropped to a whisper, suggesting she was concerned about being overheard. Victoria, there's something else you should know. Janet Morrison has been locked in her office since yesterday evening, and I heard her telling someone on the phone that the numbers don't add up. She kept saying something about $42 million in liquidated damages. The pieces were falling into place exactly as I'd expected. Jennifer's legal team had clearly reviewed the contract terms and calculated the full financial impact of what Marcus had done. The liquidated damages clause alone would cost Meridian over $60 million. If Apex chose to terminate the partnership, nearly enough to bankrupt the company or force a fire sale to larger competitors. Rebecca, I want you to be very careful about what you say and who you say it to. This situation is going to get more complicated before it gets resolved, and you don't want to get caught in the middle of corporate politics. After ending the call with Rebecca, I spent the morning researching Marcus Wellington's background more thoroughly than I'd ever done while we were colleagues. His LinkedIn profile painted the picture of an ambitious executive who'd built his career on turnaround management and operational optimization, corporate euphemisms for cost-cutting and restructuring that often destroyed companies' long-term viability. His previous positions showed a pattern of short tenures at companies that had experienced significant financial difficulties after his involvement. At BioSync Corporation, he'd been VP of Operations for 18 months before the company was acquired by a competitor in what industry publications had described as a distressed sale. At Genomics Plus, his strategic restructuring had resulted in the loss of 3 major clients and a 40% reduction in workforce before he moved on to his next opportunity. Marcus Wellington wasn't a visionary leader building sustainable businesses. He was a corporate vulture who specialized in extracting short-term value from companies before moving on to his next target. His approach to the Apex partnership wasn't based on ignorance or inexperience. It was part of a deliberate strategy to maximize immediate profits without regard for long-term consequences. The realization changed my perspective on everything that had happened. Marcus hadn't fired me because he thought he could manage the Apex relationship better. He'd fired me because he intended to restructure or terminate the partnership as part of his broader plan to reshape Meridian according to his preferred business model. But Marcus had made a critical error in his calculation. He'd assumed that Apex would be vulnerable to the same kind of pressure tactics he'd used successfully at other companies, not understanding that Jennifer Harrison and her team were far more sophisticated and legally protected than his previous target. Wednesday morning brought confirmation that my analysis had been correct. Rebecca called again, this time from her personal phone rather than the office line, her voice carrying a mixture of excitement and fear. Victoria, you're not going to believe what happened yesterday afternoon. A team of lawyers from Apex showed up at the office unannounced and demanded an immediate meeting with Marcus and the entire executive team. They were here for 3 hours, and when they left, Marcus looked like he'd seen a ghost. The image of Marcus facing a room full of corporate lawyers armed with breach of contract documentation was deeply satisfying. Rebecca, what happened during the meeting? I don't know all the details, but Janet Morrison came out of the conference room looking like she was about to throw up. She kept muttering something about breach penalties and insurance coverage, and Marcus canceled all his meetings for the rest of the week, which is really unusual for him. The speed with which Apex was moving suggested that Jennifer had treated this as the crisis it actually was. Rather than engaging in lengthy negotiations or giving Meridian time to develop a response strategy, she'd immediately deployed her legal team to establish the facts and protect her company's position. Rebecca, has there been any communication about bringing me back or negotiating some kind of resolution? The pause before Rebecca answered told me everything I needed to know. Victoria, I think Marcus is in complete denial about how serious this is. He's been telling people that Apex is just posturing and that they'll eventually accept the account transition because they can't afford to lose the partnership. Marcus's response was exactly what I'd expected from someone who'd built his career on intimidation and brinkmanship rather than collaborative problem solving. He was treating this like a negotiation where he could apply pressure and force Apex to accept his terms, not understanding that he was dealing with a company that had specifically structured their contract to prevent exactly this kind of manipulation. Rebecca, I want you to be prepared for some significant changes at Meridian over the next few weeks. If Apex exercises their contractual rights, the financial impact could be severe enough to affect everyone's job security. Thursday brought the news I'd been expecting but hoping wouldn't be necessary. Jennifer Harrison called me directly, her voice carrying the cold satisfaction of someone who'd just deployed overwhelming force to protect her company's interest. Victoria, I wanted to personally inform you that Apex Industries has formally notified Meridian Technologies of our intent to terminate our partnership agreement due to material breach of contract. The termination will be effective in 30 days unless Meridian can demonstrate full compliance with the original agreement terms. The 30-day timeline was generous by legal standards, designed to give Meridian an opportunity to cure the breach by reinstating me or negotiating an acceptable alternative. But Jennifer's tone suggested that she wasn't particularly optimistic about either option. Jennifer, what specific steps would Meridian need to take to avoid termination? Jennifer's response was precise and unambiguous. The breach notification specifies 3 requirements for curing the default. First, reinstatement of Victoria Chen as the primary account manager with full authority over all partnership activities. Second, written acknowledgement from Meridian's board of directors that future personnel changes affecting the partnership will require prior written approval from APEX. Third, payment of penalty fees totaling $800,000 for the disruption and risk created by the unauthorized personnel change. The financial penalty was substantial but manageable for a company of Meridian's size, clearly designed to be punitive rather than prohibitive. Jennifer was giving Marcus an opportunity to fix his mistake, but only if he was willing to admit the mistake and accept responsibility for the consequences. Jennifer, what happens if Meridian chooses not to cure the breach within the 30-day period? Jennifer's answer carried the weight of legal documentation and careful calculation. Termination of the partnership with liquidated damages equal to 18 months of contract value, which totals approximately $63 million. Additionally, Apex would be entitled to recover all costs associated with finding alternative vendors and any delays to our product development timeline. The total financial exposure could easily exceed $70 million, enough to force Meridian into bankruptcy or acquisition by a larger competitor. Marcus's attempt to consolidate power and eliminate opposition was about to destroy the company he'd tried to control. Jennifer, has Meridian responded to the breach notification yet? Jennifer's laugh carried a note of professional amusement, mixed with frustration. Mr. Wellington requested a meeting to discuss our concerns and explore mutually beneficial solutions. He seems to believe this is a negotiation rather than a contractual enforcement action. Marcus was still operating according to his standard playbook, treating legal obligations as opening positions in business negotiations, rather than binding commitments that had to be honored. His approach might have worked with smaller companies that lacked the resources to enforce their contracts, but Apex Industries had both the legal expertise and financial capability to pursue their rights to the fullest extent. Jennifer, I assume you declined the meeting request. Our legal team informed Mr. Wellington that Apex's position is clearly stated in the breach notification, and that we're not interested in discussions that don't address the specific cure requirement. We gave them 30 days to demonstrate compliance, not 30 days to negotiate alternative arrangement. The conversation concluded with Jennifer's assurance that she would keep me informed of any developments, particularly if Meridian attempted to contact me directly about potential reinstatement. The possibility of returning to Meridian under terms that would protect me from future retaliation was appealing, but I suspected that Marcus's ego wouldn't allow him to admit such a complete defeat. Friday afternoon brought confirmation of my suspicions in the form of a call from Janet Morrison, my former colleague and supposed friend who'd participated in my termination just 1 week earlier. Her voice carried a mixture of desperation and barely concealed resentment that suggested the week had not gone well for Meridian's leadership team. Victoria, I hope you'll accept my apology for how things were handled last week. There were board pressures and strategic considerations that made the decision very difficult, but I want you to know that it wasn't personal. The corporate non-apology was exactly what I'd expected from someone trying to manage a crisis without accepting responsibility for creating it. Janet, I appreciate you calling, but I think we both know that what happened last week was very much intentional and very much personal. Janet's voice shifted into the pleading tone I'd heard her use when trying to convince clients to accept contract modifications that favored Meridian's interest. Victoria, we need to talk about the Apex situation. There's been some miscommunication about the contract terms, and we think there might be room for creative solutions that could benefit everyone involved. The phrase creative solutions was corporate speak for asking me to help them avoid the consequences of their own actions while offering minimal concessions in return. Janet, what kind of creative solutions are you considering? Well, we've been thinking about bringing you back as a special consultant for the Apex account, maybe on a contract basis that would give you more flexibility while allowing us to maintain the partnership relationship. The offer was insulting on multiple levels, designed to give Meridian credit for resolving the crisis while offering me a diminished role with no job security or long-term protection. Janet, that's not going to work. Apex has been very clear about their requirements for curing the breach, and a consulting arrangement doesn't address any of their fundamental concerns. Janet's response revealed the depth of Meridian's desperation and the extent to which they'd underestimated the legal implications of their actions. Victoria, you have to understand our position. The board is concerned about setting precedents that could limit our flexibility in managing personnel decisions. Bringing you back with the authority level that Apex is demanding could create expectations that affect other client relationships. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in corporate deflection and responsibility avoidance, as Janet tried every possible angle to convince me to help Meridian avoid the consequences of Marcus's power grab. She offered increased salaries, stock options, executive titles, and even a seat on the board of directors, all while avoiding any acknowledgement that the termination had been wrong or that Marcus's leadership approach was fundamentally flawed. Janet, I think you need to understand something very clearly. This isn't about me or my career ambitions. This is about Apex Industries protecting their interests when a vendor fails to honor their contractual commitment. Whether I come back or not, Meridian still needs to address the fundamental issues that created this situation. Janet's final offer revealed just how desperate the situation had become and how little she understood about the forces that had been set in motion. Victoria, what if we made Marcus report to you for all client-related decisions? We could restructure the management hierarchy to give you ultimate authority over all partnerships and account relationships. The suggestion that Marcus Wellington would accept a subordinate role to the woman he'd fired was so absurd that I actually laughed out loud. Janet, I don't think Marcus is going to be amenable to that kind of arrangement. And honestly, after everything that's happened, I'm not sure Meridian is the right place for me anymore. The call ended with Janet promising to present my concerns to the board and explore additional options for resolution, but her tone suggested she already knew that the situation was beyond repair. Marcus had created a crisis that couldn't be solved with the same kind of corporate maneuvering that had caused it, and the consequences were about to reshape the entire company. As Friday evening approached, I found myself in the unexpected position of having multiple options for my professional future. 3 former colleagues had already reached out about opportunities at their companies, all of them offering senior positions that would represent significant upgrades from my role at Meridian. More importantly, Jennifer Harrison had hinted at the possibility of Apex creating a new position that would allow me to continue our partnership work as a direct employee, rather than through a vendor relationship. The week that had started with my termination and apparent professional disaster was ending with validation of my expertise and multiple paths forward. Marcus Wellington's attempt to eliminate competition and consolidate power had instead demonstrated my value to clients and colleagues, while exposing his own fundamental incompetence as a leader. But the most satisfying aspect of the entire situation was the knowledge that Marcus was finally experiencing the consequences of his actions. For years, he'd built his career on manipulating corporate politics and avoiding accountability for the damage he caused to companies and careers. Now he was facing an opponent who couldn't be intimidated, manipulated, or pressured into accepting terms that didn't serve their interests. Apex Industries wasn't just another client relationship that could be managed through aggressive negotiation and corporate gamesmanship. They were a sophisticated partner with their own legal resources and strategic objectives, protected by carefully negotiated contracts that gave them powerful tools for enforcing their rights. The 20-day countdown that Apex had initiated wasn't just a deadline for resolving a business dispute. It was a timer counting down to the potential destruction of everything Marcus had tried to build through his corporate coup. Every day that passed without compliance brought Meridian closer to financial catastrophe and strategic collapse. And the beautiful irony was that the contract provisions that gave Apex such devastating power had been negotiated by me, approved by Marcus himself, and designed specifically to prevent the kind of short-sighted decision-making that had led to this crisis. Marcus hadn't just attacked me personally, he'd violated the fundamental principles of partnership and collaboration that made successful business relationships possible. As I prepared for what promised to be an eventful second week since my termination, I felt a sense of anticipation that surprised me with its intensity. The woman who'd been escorted out of Meridian Technologies with a cardboard box was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own value and wouldn't accept anything less than the respect and recognition she'd earned through 20 years of excellence. Marcus Wellington was about to learn that some battles can't be won through corporate politics and executive manipulation. Sometimes the person you're trying to destroy has weapons you never knew existed, and the victory you thought you'd achieved is actually the beginning of your own downfall. Monday morning of the second week brought an unexpected call from David Kim, my former CEO and mentor who had mysteriously resigned on the same day as my termination. His voice carried a mixture of regret and barely contained anger that immediately put me on alert. "Victoria, I need to see you immediately. There are things about what happened at Meridian that you need to know, and I have information that could change everything about how this situation resolved." We met at a small cafe downtown, far from the corporate district where we might be spotted by current Meridian employees. David looked exhausted, his usually impeccable appearance showing signs of stress and sleepless nights. When he sat down across from me, his first words explained everything about the corporate coup I'd experienced. "Victoria, my resignation wasn't voluntary. Marcus Wellington and 3 board members orchestrated a hostile takeover that forced me out through threats and financial manipulation. They've been planning this for months, and your termination was just the first step in completely restructuring the company according to Marcus's vision." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. David Kim had built Meridian Technologies from a small startup into an industry leader through 20 years of ethical leadership and innovative vision. The idea that he could be forced out through corporate manipulations seemed impossible, but the haunted look in his eyes told me he was speaking the truth. "David, what kind of threats and financial manipulation are we talking about?" David pulled out a folder thick with documents and spread them across the table between us. Marcus convinced the board that the company needed aggressive modernization to remain competitive. He presented a restructuring plan that would eliminate what he called legacy personnel and outdated client management approaches. The plan specifically targeted you and me as obstacles to profitable growth. The documents David showed me revealed the scope of Marcus's ambitions and the calculated nature of his attack on our positions. Financial projections showed how eliminating senior employees and renegotiating client contracts could increase short-term profitability by 30%. Personnel assessments portrayed me as overpaid and emotionally attached to client relationships that limited the company's flexibility. "David, this suggests that Marcus has been planning to restructure or terminate major client relationships, not just change account management. Did he specifically target the Apex partnership?" David's expression darkened as he pointed to a section of Marcus's presentation that made my blood run cold. Marcus told the board that the Apex contract was too restrictive and gave too much control to a single employee. He argued that renegotiating the partnership under more favorable terms could increase our profit margins significantly. The pieces of Marcus's strategy were becoming clear, and the picture that emerged was far more sinister than simple corporate ambition. Marcus hadn't just wanted to eliminate me as a rival, he'd wanted to use my removal as justification for restructuring the Apex partnership according to terms that would be more profitable for Meridian, but potentially disastrous for Apex's project timelines and technical requirements. "David, did Marcus understand the legal implications of trying to modify the Apex contract unilaterally?" David's laugh was bitter and full of regret. Marcus convinced the board that large clients like Apex would accept contract modifications rather than face the disruption and expense of finding new vendors. He claimed that my approach and your client management style gave too much power to clients and limited the company's ability to maximize profit. The conversation continued for 2 hours as David laid out the full scope of Marcus's corporate coup and the financial pressures that had forced his resignation. The board had been convinced that radical change was necessary for the company's survival, and Marcus had positioned himself as the visionary leader who could implement the necessary reform. But David's most shocking revelation came near the end of our meeting when he pulled out a document that I recognized immediately as an internal legal memo about the Apex contract. "Victoria, Marcus specifically asked our legal team to identify ways to modify or terminate the Apex partnership without triggering penalty clauses. The legal memo concluded that it was impossible to change the fundamental terms without your cooperation or a legitimate breach by Apex. That's when Marcus decided that removing you was the first necessary step." The document David showed me was a smoking gun that proved Marcus's intent to violate the Apex contract from the beginning. He hadn't fired me because of performance concerns or strategic differences. He'd fired me specifically to create the conditions for breaching our most important client relationship. David, are you willing to provide this documentation to support legal action against Marcus and the board? David's response was immediate and unequivocal. Victoria, I'm going to do more than provide documentation. I'm going to help you destroy Marcus Wellington's career and expose the board members who enabled this corporate sabotage. As we concluded our meeting, David handed me a business card with contact information for his attorney and promised to coordinate with my legal team to build a comprehensive case against Meridian's current leadership. The alliance I'd gained was more powerful than anything I could have hoped for, combining insider knowledge with documented evidence of corporate malfeasance. Tuesday brought news that Marcus's situation was deteriorating faster than anyone had anticipated. Rebecca Martinez called me early in the morning with updates that suggested the company was approaching complete crisis mode. Victoria, Marcus called an emergency board meeting yesterday afternoon, and it lasted until almost midnight. 3 board members resigned this morning, and there are rumors that the company's insurance carriers are refusing to cover potential liabilities related to the Apex situation. The speed of the collapse was remarkable, even by the standards of corporate scandal. Marcus had built his coup on the assumption that he could control the narrative and manage the consequences of his actions, but the financial reality of Apex's contract enforcement was proving far more destructive than he'd anticipated. Rebecca, what's the current status of the Apex relationship? Has Marcus made any attempt to contact them about resolution? Rebecca's voice dropped to a whisper, suggesting she was concerned about being overheard. Marcus has been trying to reach Jennifer Harrison for 3 days, but Apex is refusing all communication except through their legal team. The lawyers have made it clear that they're only interested in discussing compliance with the breach notice, not negotiating alternative arrangements. The image of Marcus desperately trying to contact Jennifer while she maintained complete radio silence was deeply satisfying. He'd spent years manipulating corporate relationships through pressure and intimidation, but Apex was treating him exactly as he deserved, as a vendor who had failed to honor his commitments and was now facing the consequences. Rebecca, has there been any discussion about trying to bring me back to resolve the situation? Rebecca's pause told me everything I needed to know about Marcus's state of mind and his willingness to admit defeat. Victoria, Marcus is still insisting that this is just a negotiating tactic by Apex and that they'll eventually accept a modified arrangement. He's told the remaining board members that bringing you back would set a dangerous precedent that could encourage other clients to make similar demands. Marcus's refusal to acknowledge reality was exactly what I'd expected from someone who'd built his career on avoiding accountability for his mistakes. Even facing financial catastrophe, he was more concerned about protecting his ego than saving the company he'd claimed to be reforming. Wednesday afternoon brought the call I'd been expecting but dreading. Jennifer Harrison contacted me directly with news that would effectively end Marcus's tenure at Meridian Technologies. Victoria, Apex's 30-day cure period expires tomorrow, and Meridian has made no meaningful attempt to address the breach condition. Our legal team is prepared to execute the contract termination and pursue liquidated damages, but I wanted to give you advance notice because this will likely trigger significant changes at Meridian. The finality in Jennifer's voice made it clear that Apex had exhausted their patience with Marcus's incompetence and was prepared to use every legal weapon available to protect their interests. Jennifer, what's the timeline for implementing the termination and pursuing damage? Jennifer's response was crisp and businesslike, reflecting the meticulous planning that had characterized her approach throughout the crisis. Termination notice will be delivered Thursday morning, with effective date 30 days later. Liquidated damages calculation will be submitted simultaneously, totaling $63.7 million. We'll also be filing claims for additional costs related to project delays and vendor replacement expenses. The total financial exposure would almost certainly force Meridian into bankruptcy or emergency acquisition by a larger competitor. Marcus's attempt to maximize short-term profits had instead triggered the complete destruction of the company's most valuable relationship and its financial stability. Jennifer, I assume this means that any possibility of resolving the situation through my reinstatement is no longer available. Jennifer's laugh carried a note of professional satisfaction mixed with personal vindication. Victoria, Apex gave Meridian 30 days to demonstrate good faith compliance with our agreement. Instead of addressing our concerns, Ms. Willington spent the time trying to negotiate alternative arrangements that would allow him to avoid responsibility for his decisions. We're done giving him opportunities to do the right thing. The conversation concluded with Jennifer's assurance that Apex's actions would be swift and decisive, designed to minimize their own exposure while sending a clear message to other vendors about the consequences of failing to honor partnership commitment. Thursday morning, Marcus Wellington's corporate empire began its final collapse. Rebecca called me at 8:15 with news that would have been shocking if I hadn't been expecting it for days. Victoria, Meridian's stock price dropped 30% in pre-market trading after news leaked about the Apex termination notice. The board called an emergency meeting, and Marcus has been locked in the conference room with lawyers and accountants since 7 o'clock this morning. The financial markets had immediately recognized the implications of losing Meridian's largest client, particularly under circumstances that suggested fundamental management incompetence. Investors were fleeing the stock faster than the company could manage the crisis communication. Rebecca, has there been any official announcement about leadership changes or restructuring plans? Rebecca's voice carried a mixture of excitement and fear that reflected the chaos consuming Meridian's corporate headquarters. The board issued a statement saying they're reviewing all strategic options and considering leadership changes that would restore client confidence. Marcus hasn't been seen outside the conference room, and his assistant told me that all his meetings for the rest of the week have been canceled. By Thursday afternoon, the business media had picked up the story of Meridian's corporate crisis, with financial journalists painting the Apex termination as a cautionary tale about the dangers of aggressive leadership transitions and inadequate client relationship management. The coverage was devastating for Marcus personally, portraying him as an executive who destroyed a successful company through arrogance and poor judgment. Friday brought the final act of Marcus Wellington's corporate tragedy in the form of a conference call that Rebecca managed to listen in on through a scheduling error that left her connected to the board's emergency session. Victoria, you're not going to believe what just happened. The board voted unanimously to terminate Marcus as CEO and are asking him to resign from the company entirely. They're also discussing potential legal action against him for breaching his fiduciary duties to shareholders. The speed and completeness of Marcus's downfall was remarkable even by the standards of corporate scandals. In less than 2 weeks, he'd gone from celebrating his promotion to facing termination and potential lawsuits from his own board of directors. Rebecca, did the board discuss any plans for resolving the Apex situation or approaching me about returning? Rebecca's response revealed the depth of the crisis and the limited options available to Meridian's remaining leadership. The board appointed Janet Morrison as interim CEO and authorized her to do whatever's necessary to salvage the Apex relationship. She's supposed to contact you directly about potential terms for resolution. Janet's call came within 2 hours of the board's decision, her voice carrying a humility and desperation that contrasted sharply with her confident corporate demeanor during my termination meeting just 2 weeks earlier. Victoria, I want to start by offering you a complete and unreserved apology for my role in the decisions that led to this crisis. The board has asked me to explore any and all options for resolving the Apex situation and restoring our partnership relation. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in corporate humiliation, as Janet offered me increasingly generous terms for returning to Meridian. Executive Vice President title, 50% salary increase, stock options, board representation and complete autonomy over all client relationships were just the opening offers in what became a bidding war for my forgiveness. Janet, these offers are certainly generous, but I think we need to address the fundamental question of whether Meridian can provide the kind of stable ethical leadership environment that would make a return attractive to me. Janet's response revealed the extent to which the crisis had humbled Meridian's leadership and forced them to confront the consequences of their corporate coup. Victoria, The board has authorized me to guarantee in writing that you would have complete protection from any future personnel actions related to your client management responsibility. We're also prepared to restructure the executive hierarchy to ensure that client relationships remain insulated from internal politics. But the most significant offer came at the end of our conversation, when Janet revealed the board's willingness to go far beyond simple reinstatement to rebuild the relationship I'd spent 20 years developing. Victoria, the board would also like to explore the possibility of spinning off the client relations division as a separate subsidiary that you would own and operate independently. Meridian would retain a minority stake and exclusive partnership rights, but you would have complete control over operations and strategy. The subsidiary proposal was appealing on multiple levels, offering me the independence I'd gained from my termination, while providing a path for rebuilding the professional relationships that had defined my career. More importantly, it would give me the protection and autonomy necessary to prevent future corporate interference with client partnerships. Janet, I'm interested in exploring the subsidiary option, but I'll need to review the proposal with my legal team and discuss the arrangement with Apex before making any commitment. While Janet worked on structuring a formal offer for my consideration, I contacted Jennifer Harrison to discuss Apex's position on potential resolution scenarios and their willingness to work with a restructured Meridian organization. Victoria, Apex's primary concern has always been ensuring the continuity and quality of our partnership relationship. If Meridian can demonstrate genuine commitment to honoring our original agreement terms under stable leadership, we're willing to consider suspending the termination process. Jennifer's willingness to consider alternatives was encouraging, but her conditions for resolution were specific and non-negotiable. Victoria, any resolution would need to include your return with full authority over our partnership, written guarantees about future stability, and financial penalties sufficient to ensure that these problems don't recur. The following week became a complex dance of legal negotiations, financial calculations, and strategic planning as multiple parties worked to structure an arrangement that would satisfy everyone's interests while preventing future conflict. David Kim proved invaluable as an advisor and advocate, using his insider knowledge of Meridian's operations and his relationships with board members to facilitate productive negotiation. His documentation of Marcus's corporate coup also provided leverage for ensuring that any resolution would include adequate protections against future interference. The final agreement, reached after 10 days of intensive negotiations, exceeded even my most optimistic expectations for professional vindication and future security. The Victoria Chen Consulting Group would be established as an independent subsidiary, wholly owned by me but operating under exclusive partnership with Meridian Technologies. All existing client relationships would transfer to the new entity, with Meridian maintaining a revenue-sharing arrangement that incentivized mutual success rather than internal competition. Apex Industries agreed to suspend their contract termination in exchange for enhanced service guarantees and the establishment of a client advisory board that would provide ongoing oversight of the partnership relationship. The financial penalties that Marcus had triggered would be waived in favor of the restructured arrangement, saving Meridian from bankruptcy while ensuring that Apex's interests were protected going forward. Marcus Wellington's termination from Meridian became final on the same day that my new consulting group was officially launched, a poetic justice that wasn't lost on anyone involved in the negotiation. His attempt to eliminate competition and consolidate power had instead created the conditions for my professional independence and his own corporate exile. The business media covered the resolution as a case study in crisis management and the importance of maintaining strong client relationships during leadership transition. Marcus was portrayed as a cautionary example of executive overreach, while I was positioned as a model for turning professional setbacks into opportunities for growth and independence. 6 months later, the Victoria Chen Consulting Group had expanded beyond the original Meridian partnership to include direct relationships with 4 additional major biotech companies, all of them attracted by the stability and expertise that Marcus had tried to undermine. The subsidiary had become more valuable than my original position at Meridian, generating revenue streams that exceeded anything I could have achieved as a traditional employee. Jennifer Harrison and Apex Industries became my flagship client and strongest advocate, frequently referring other companies to my consulting group and serving as references for the kind of partnership-focused approach that had made our collaboration so successful. The relationship that Marcus had tried to exploit for short-term gain became the foundation for long-term professional independence and growth. David Kim accepted an advisory position with my consulting group and eventually became my business partner, bringing his strategic vision and industry relationships to support our expansion into new markets and service areas. Together, we built the kind of client-focused organization that we'd always envisioned, free from the corporate politics and short-term thinking that had made Meridian vulnerable to Marcus's manipulation. The most satisfying aspect of the entire experience was the knowledge that Marcus Wellington's career never recovered from his spectacular failure at Meridian. His reputation for destructive leadership made him unemployable at any reputable company in our industry, and his attempts to rebuild his corporate image were consistently undermined by the well-documented details of his corporate coup and its disastrous consequences. 3 years after my termination, I attended an industry conference where Marcus was scheduled to speak about leadership and crisis management, apparently hoping to rewrite the narrative of his failure at Meridian. The presentation room was nearly empty, with most attendees choosing to attend competing sessions rather than hear from someone whose corporate judgment had been so thoroughly discredited. During the question and answer session, someone asked Marcus about lessons learned from major client relationship failures, clearly referencing the Apex situation without mentioning it directly. Marcus's response was a masterclass in deflection and responsibility avoidance, blaming market conditions, client unreasonableness, and inherited problems rather than acknowledging his role in creating the crisis. I watched from the back of the room as Marcus struggled to explain away his mistakes without admitting fault, his corporate confidence replaced by the desperate energy of someone trying to rebuild a career destroyed by his own arrogance. The man who'd once celebrated his promotion with champagne while firing loyal employees was now reduced to making excuses for failures that had become legendary cautionary tales in our industry. After his presentation, I approached Marcus in the hallway outside the conference room, curious to see how he would react to encountering the person whose termination had triggered his downfall. "Marcus," I said with professional courtesy, extending my hand for a handshake. "I saw your presentation. Interesting perspective on crisis management." Marcus's reaction was immediate and revealing, his face cycling through surprise, embarrassment, and barely concealed resentment before settling on a forced smile that fooled no one. "Victoria, I heard about your consulting group. Congratulations on your success." The brief conversation that followed was stilted and uncomfortable as Marcus tried to project confidence while clearly struggling with the reminder of his greatest professional failure. He mentioned potential opportunities for collaboration and expressed interest in learning from my client management expertise, apparently hoping to somehow benefit from the relationships he'd tried to destroy. "Marcus, I appreciate the interest, but I think we've both learned that our approaches to business relationships are fundamentally incompatible. I wish you the best in your future endeavors." As I walked away from that encounter, I felt a sense of completion that had been building for 3 years. The woman who'd been escorted out of Meridian Technologies with a cardboard box had been transformed into someone who understood her own value and had built the professional independence to protect it. Marcus Wellington's attempt to eliminate competition had instead created a competitor who was more successful and more respected than he could ever hope to be. The Victoria Chen Consulting Group now employed 15 professionals and maintained partnerships with 12 major corporations, generating annual revenue that exceeded what my entire department at Meridian had produced. The client-focused approach that Marcus had dismissed as outdated had become the foundation for sustainable growth and industry leadership. Every new client I worked with, every successful project completion, and every industry recognition was a validation of the principles that Marcus had tried to undermine through his corporate coup. The relationships built on trust, expertise, and mutual respect had proven more durable and valuable than any organizational structure or profit maximization strategy. The final irony was that Meridian Technologies, under Janet Morrison's leadership and with the revenue-sharing arrangement from my consulting group, had become more profitable and stable than it had ever been under Marcus's aggressive restructuring plan. The company that he'd tried to transform through elimination of legacy personnel and modernization of client relationships was thriving precisely because those elements had been preserved and strengthened. Marcus Wellington's greatest professional achievement had been creating the conditions for his own replacement by someone better qualified for the leadership role he'd coveted. His corporate coup had succeeded only in proving that some victories are indistinguishable from defeats, and that the people you try to destroy sometimes have weapons you never knew existed. The firing that was supposed to end my career had instead launched a new chapter that was more rewarding and successful than anything I could have achieved within the constraints of traditional corporate employment. Marcus had given me the greatest gift possible, the motivation and opportunity to build something better than what he'd tried to take away. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.